The great hall of Castle Valdenia shimmered with candlelight, its stone walls echoing with the laughter of lords and the clatter of goblets. The spring feast was in full bloom. Platters of roasted lamb and honeyed figs lined the long oak tables, and music floated from a trio of lutanists perched near the hearth. At the high table, King Alaric sat tall and silent, his expression unreadable beneath his iron circlet. Widowed for 5 years, he seldom smiled, even on feast days. Suddenly, the doors burst open with a thunderous crack. A hush rippled through the hall. All eyes turned. A child stood there, small, trembling, no more than 7 winters old. Her dress was torn, streaked with dirt and blood. One eye was swollen shut, and her thin arms clutched at her chest like she could hold her world together. "They hit my mum," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "She's dying." Gasps spread like wildfire. Someone dropped a goblet. A servant muttered a prayer. And then silence, complete and cutting. The girl staggered forward on bare feet. Her voice broke as she cried again, "Please, help her!" King Alaric stood. The entire hall seemed to lean in. He stepped down from the dais, his boots echoing against the stone. Behind him, Queen Mother Ileana hissed, "She's a peasant. Remove her at once." But Alaric raised a hand, silencing the guards. His voice was calm, but his eyes were cold steel. "Who hit your mother?" The girl's lips trembled. "The men from Black Hollow, the Baron's men, they said she refused to help his lady, so they beat her." Black Hollow. A border village, forgotten by the crown, plagued with hunger and illness. The court murmured, some shaking their heads, others whispering of witchcraft. But Alaric knelt before the child. "What is your name?" "Leora." He studied her for a long moment. The hall waited with bated breath. "Leora," he said, his voice low, "your mother is not forgotten." He rose and turned to his captain. "Send for Sir Edron. I want a physician and 10 riders ready within the hour. Bring her mother here." A nobleman near the dais stepped forward. "Your Majesty, this is not a matter for kings." "The laws—" "I make the laws," Alaric said, his voice sharp as drawn steel. "And I say no woman shall die beaten in my kingdom without answer." The noble shrank back, his face pale. Leora swayed on her feet. Alaric reached down and lifted her easily into his arms. The murmurs began again, louder this time. Shock, disbelief, disapproval. Queen Mother Ileana rose, her voice smooth but biting. "This sets a dangerous precedent. Compassion breeds rebellion. The court will not forget this indulgence." Alaric didn't look at her. "Let them remember it well." He turned and carried Leora toward the back of the hall, ignoring the stairs. As they passed the hearth, the girl whispered, "She's all I have." "And you are not alone now," he said. Behind him, the feast resumed in awkward, uncertain fragments. The music faltered, then stopped entirely. But in that one moment, a silent bond had been forged between a child with nothing and a king who thought he'd lost the ability to care. And if you felt that tug, that ache when someone dares to hope in the dark, then stay with us. There's more than one heart that will be tested before this tale ends. In the quiet chamber beyond the throne room, Leora sat on a cushioned bench beside the hearth, her small fingers curled around a silver cup of warm milk she barely touched. Her face was freshly washed, but her eyes held the same hollow fear. A serving maid had offered to dress her wounds, but she refused anyone, except the king. King Alaric stood by the arched window, his gaze fixed beyond the castle walls. Rain had begun to fall lightly, beading on the glass like tears from the sky. He did not turn when the door opened. "Your Majesty," said Sir Edron, entering in his dark riding cloak. His face was lined from years in battle and medicine alike. "I came as ordered." Alaric gestured toward the girl. "This is Leora. Her mother lies in Black Hollow, beaten near to death by Baron Eston's men. Take my physician, 10 riders, and bring her here. Alive, if still possible." Sir Edron's brow furrowed. "That village is near the marshes. Roads will be foul. It may take a day's ride, even with haste." "Then ride now. I'll send word to the local reeve." "No one interferes." As the knight bowed and turned to leave, Leora looked up suddenly. "Please," she whispered, "don't leave her alone too long. She gets cold fast." Sir Edryn's eyes softened. "I'll ride swift as wind, little one." The door closed behind him. The silence returned. Alaric sat in the high-backed chair across from her, folding his hands. "Tell me about her." Leora blinked. "Mama?" He nodded. "She's a healer," the girl said slowly. "Knows every herb. People used to come from other villages when the plague was bad. She never turned anyone away, even if they had no coin. She said mercy makes the hands stronger." "And the Baron's men?" "They came yesterday. His lady was ill and Mama tried to help, but the woman was too far gone." "They still blamed her." Alaric's jaw tightened. "And no one protected her. They said she was cursed, that she failed on purpose. They threw her in the mud." Leora's voice cracked. She looked down, tears slipping silently onto her hands. Alaric leaned forward. "Your mother sounds like a woman of courage." "She's all I had," Leora said, her voice a fragile whisper. "We didn't have much, but she never let me go hungry. She braided my hair every morning. She sang even when her voice was hoarse from crying. And she always said that the king would protect his people." Alaric felt the words like a blade. "She believed that." Leora nodded. He looked into the fire for a long moment. She was right. Elsewhere in the castle, the feast was slowly dissolving into rumor and complaint. Nobles grumbled about the peasant child housed in royal quarters. Queen Mother Ilyana sat with her ladies, speaking in hushed tones of Alaric's dangerous softness. But none dared confront him again. Later that evening, as torches were lit along the ramparts, Alaric instructed the steward, "See that she has food, and prepare a bedchamber near the nursery." "You wish her housed among the noble children, sire?" the steward asked carefully. "She is under my protection now." Leora had fallen asleep, curled on the bench, the milk untouched beside her. A serving maid moved to lift her, but Alaric gestured her away. Gently he gathered the girl in his arms. She murmured something unintelligible in sleep, then went still against his shoulder. In that moment, holding a child so clearly shaped by suffering, Alaric remembered the last time he'd carried his own daughter before the fever took her. It had felt like holding a fading candle, one breath away from darkness. Now, as he placed Leora on a soft bed, pulled the furs up to her chin, and lingered a moment longer than needed, he felt that same flicker of something he thought long extinguished. Purpose. He turned to leave, but Leora stirred. "Will you come back?" she asked drowsily. He hesitated. "Yes." And with that promise lingering in the air, he stepped into the corridor, the rain still whispering against the stone. The morning broke grey and heavy, with clouds pressing low against the turrets of Castle Valdenia. The air smelled of damp stone and distant pine. In the council chamber, tension hung thick as wood smoke. King Alaric stood at the head of the long table, the sleeves of his tunic pushed up, revealing arms marked by old scars. Before him sat half the realm's nobles, dukes, barons, ministers, all watching him with careful eyes. "The riders left before dawn," he said. "They will reach Black Hollow by nightfall. Lady Merryn is to be brought here under my protection." Baron Harlan, thick-necked and blunt, sneered. "A peasant healer? You would place her above the law, Your Majesty?" "She is not above the law, but the law does not protect those who are too poor to scream loud enough. That ends now." A ripple of discontent moved through the room. Duke Renwer, smooth as polished steel, leaned forward. "And if every villager with a grievance sends a child to storm your hall, shall we house them all in the nursery? Where is the line, sire?" Alaric's gaze swept the table. "The line lies in justice, or has this court grown too proud to remember it?" Queen Mother Ilyana sat at the far end, her hands folded like folded wings. "Compassion is admirable," she said coolly. "But kings must govern with the mind, not the heart. You risk the balance we've preserved for decades." Alaric's jaw tightened. "Do you recall what Eleanor said before she died?" Silence. "She begged me never to harden. She told me our daughter should have grown in a kingdom where mercy was not weakness." The name of his late wife, Elena, settled over the chamber like a sudden snowfall. For a moment no one spoke. "She was loved by many," Ileana said at last. "She loved the people, and she died believing this court would protect them. I failed her once. I will not do so again." The door opened quietly behind them. The steward stepped in, bowed and announced, "The child has awakened, sire." Alaric dismissed the council without another word. As the chamber emptied, murmurs rose, frustration, fear, and in some voices curiosity. Back in the nursery, Leora stood by the window, her fingers tracing the rain on the glass. She wore a clean tunic, far too large, belted at the waist. Her tangled hair was damp from a morning wash. She turned when Alaric entered, blinking up at him. "You really sent men to get her?" she asked. "I did." She nodded, quiet. "Most men wouldn't care." "Most men aren't kings," he replied. He crouched beside her. "But I wasn't always a king. I was a boy once, not far from here, in a smaller castle. My father was cold, my mother colder still. I learned to listen before I spoke. I listened so long I forgot how to speak without their voices in my head. Do you hear them now?" Leora asked, her eyes wide. He smiled faintly. "Less than before." She looked back to the window. "I used to think the king lived in the clouds. Mama said you were too far away to hear people like us." "I've been far," he admitted. "But I'm listening now." That night, as candles flickered low and shadows stretched across the marble floors, Alaric found himself alone in the chapel. The stained glass above him showed a lion crowned in flame, Valdenia's emblem, proud and fierce. He knelt, not in prayer but in memory. "Elena," he murmured, "I never knew what you saw in me. But I see her. This girl. Can I feel you in the way she looks at the world without flinching? I don't know what I'm doing, but I swear I won't let her be broken." Behind him, the wind howled softly through the stone arches. And somewhere beyond those walls, a storm was beginning to stir. The sky over Black Hollow was thick with smoke, not from fire, but from hearths choked by wet wood and roofs that smouldered from neglect. The village sat hunched in the marshlands, mud swallowing its paths and the stench of rot clinging to the air. Rain had ceased by midday, but the wind carried cold from the north. Sir Edryn guided his steed past the crooked wooden gate, flanked by 10 riders bearing the king's colours. Villagers peeked from shuttered windows, eyes narrowed with suspicion. Most said nothing, only watched. He dismounted in front of the largest hovel, its thatch sagging, a crude red mark painted on the door. The reeve stepped forward, hat clutched in hand. "She's in there, sir. What's left of her?" Edryn's face hardened. "What mark is this?" The reeve looked away. "Witch's mark. The Baron's men put it there after—" He trailed off as Edryn pushed open the door and entered. Inside it was dark and damp. The scent of mildew warred with the sharp tang of dried blood. A woman lay on a straw pallet, her breath shallow, skin pale beneath bruises that ran like ink down her arms and across her jaw. Her hair, once chestnut, was matted and streaked with mud. "Merrin," Edryn said softly, kneeling beside her. He opened his satchel, working quickly, checking her pulse, applying tinctures. "You've been treated like an animal." A rasp escaped her throat. "The Baron's mistress. She died." Edryn met her eyes. "You did what you could." "They didn't care." Her voice cracked. "They needed someone to blame." He poured a warming draught between her lips. She coughed weakly, then gripped his wrist with surprising strength. "Leora, is she—" "She's safe." "With the king." That word king seemed to stir something in her. "She still has fire," she whispered. "She does." Merrin smiled faintly. "She was born screaming. Wouldn't stop until I held her." Outside, a commotion rose. Angry voices, boots in mud. One of the riders burst in. "Baron Esten's men, 5 of them, armed." Edryn stood swiftly, drawing his sword. "Hold them." "No blood." He stepped outside to meet them. The leader, a thick-set man in chainmail, sneered at the royal sigil. "This is Baron's land. What right have you to meddle in it?" "I ride under King Alaric's seal," Edryn said. The woman is under royal protection. She's a traitor, a witch. She's a healer, Edren snapped, and a mother. The man spat. She killed the Baron's beloved. She couldn't save her, that's not the same. Tension crackled between the lines of men, but Edren held his ground. If you interfere, you defy the king. Do so, and you answer to the crown directly. There was a long pause. Then the soldier turned, muttering, "Let the crows have her." When they were gone, Edren returned to Meryn, who was barely conscious. "Rest," he told her. "We're taking you home." She opened her eyes once more, clouded with pain. "No, not me. Not this time. Don't say that. Listen." She reached up, fingers trembling. "Tell her. She is not cursed. She is light, and she will burn brighter than this world deserves." "I'll tell her," Edren whispered, swallowing the ache in his throat. By nightfall they laid her body gently across a cart, wrapped in linen, a sprig of rosemary at her breast. Rain began again as they left Black Hollow behind, and behind them the village returned to silence. Edren rode at the front, the king's banner heavy in the wind. He did not look back. There was no peace to be found in that place, only the weight of a broken promise and the duty now bound to his hands. And in the stillness of the march home, he wondered how a little girl would carry the truth of her mother's end. The gates of Castle Valdenia opened just as dawn crested over the hills, bleeding gold and ash across the sky. The escort returned in silence, their horses slow with fatigue, hooves heavy against the cobblestone. The cart followed behind, draped in royal cloth, guarded as if bearing a queen. From the battlements, Alaric watched with arms crossed and eyes sharp, unmoving as the wind tugged at his cloak. When Sir Edren dismounted, his expression told the truth before a word passed. "She passed before we left," Edren said, voice low. "She held on long enough to know her daughter was safe." Alaric didn't speak. He stared at the covered form for a long moment, then descended the steps without a word. The courtyard fell still. Even the soldiers bowed their heads as he approached. He reached the cart and pulled back the cloth. There lay Meryn, her face peaceful despite the bruises, hands folded over her chest, a sprig of rosemary tucked between them. Her hair had been brushed, her eyes closed, her body wrapped with care. A healer's dignity preserved even in death. Alaric stared, his features unreadable. The silence stretched long. "She said something," Edren offered gently, "before she passed. She wanted Leora to know she's not cursed, that she's light, brighter than this world deserves." Alaric closed his eyes. "She saw more clearly than any of us." He turned. "Prepare the royal garden for burial. She'll be laid near the fountain. My wife would have wanted it." Murmurs rose immediately among the court. A peasant? In royal ground? But none dared speak aloud. The king's face was granite. That afternoon, Leora was brought to the chapel. She wore a simple blue dress, the hem stitched hurriedly to fit. Her hair was combed, though a single strand curled rebelliously over her cheek. She stood beside Alaric, clutching a small bundle of wildflowers. "She liked these," she said quietly. "She used to press them in books." Alaric nodded. Fayume placed them in her hands. The chapel was empty save for them. No priests, no court, just stone and stained glass, and the scent of lavender oil meant to mask the scent of death. Leora approached the casket with slow, hesitant steps. She looked up at the still face of her mother, then down at the flowers in her hands. Her lip trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I wasn't fast enough." Alaric stepped forward, knelt beside her. "This was not your fault," he said. "Your mother did not leave this world thinking of failure. She left it thinking of you." Leora blinked hard, then placed the flowers gently on Meryn's chest. For a moment she simply stood, frozen in silence. Then she turned and walked back to Alaric's side. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small ring, gold, with a pale blue stone. It was delicate, clearly crafted for a woman's hand. "It was Elena's," he said. "She wore it every day until the fever took her." He returned to the casket and placed the ring beside the wildflowers. "From one mother to another," They buried her as the sun dipped low, casting firelight across the marble. A few trusted guards stood witness, along with Sir Edryn and Helene the seamstress, who had come silently, her hands folded in reverence. That night, the castle was quiet. No feasts, no laughter. Just the hush of morning beneath high stone arches. In his private chamber, Alaric sat at the edge of the hearth staring into the embers. The wine on the table remained untouched. His shoulders were bowed, his face lit only by firelight. He had buried many. Friends, soldiers, his own wife. But this death had shaken something loose. He had not cried when Elena died, not when his daughter succumbed to fever. But now, in the silence of night, a single tear slid down his cheek and vanished into his beard. And somewhere beyond the window, Leora whispered to herself as she watched the stars. She said the king would protect us. And she was right. The days that followed were quiet, but not peaceful. Whispers stirred the castle like dry leaves in the corridors, small at first, but growing. Word had spread through Valdenia. The king had buried a peasant woman in the royal gardens, and her daughter now walked the halls like nobility. For some, it was a tale of compassion. For others, it was heresy. In the great chamber, Alaric presided over court, but his focus often drifted to the corner where Leora sat in a carved wooden chair, legs swinging just above the floor. She wore a pale green dress stitched by castle seamstresses, and though she fidgeted often, she listened, closely, like someone determined to understand a world that had always kept her outside its doors. One morning, as the petitions began, Duke Renwer rose from his place. His voice was smooth as silk and twice as sharp. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "may I speak plainly with all loyalty?" Alaric raised a brow. "I would be more worried if you spoke otherwise. The matter of the girl has become a source of unrest. The noble houses question your judgment. To elevate a peasant child, however tragic her loss beyond her station, invites confusion among the people. She has not been elevated," Alaric said evenly. "She has been protected. Protection is not the issue. Proximity is. She sits beside you in court, eats in the upper halls, sleeps in royal quarters. Some ask whether she is being groomed for a role." Alaric's gaze cooled. "She has no role. She has grief. That should be enough." Renwer bowed again. "Forgive my candor, sire, but rumors are not so easily buried," the court murmured in agreement. The Queen Mother said nothing, but her eyes lingered on Leora with the cold precision of a hawk. Later that day, Alaric walked with Sir Edryn along the eastern wall. The stone beneath their boots was wet with morning dew. "I hear them," Alaric said. "The court, the whispers." "I do." "And?" Edryn paused, then said carefully, "They fear what they cannot place in a box. Nobles trust bloodlines. They fear the chaos of mercy without protocol." Alaric sighed. "She reminds me of Elena. Not in form, but in fire. Then you must choose how far you're willing to go to protect that fire." In the castle library, Leora sat with a heavy book open on her lap. She mouthed the words as she traced each line with her finger. Beside her, Helene, the seamstress, stitched quietly, glancing over with quiet pride. "You're learning fast," Helene said. "I like books," Leora replied. "They don't shout. They don't lie." Helene paused. "And what would you do if you could read all of them?" "Fix things," Leora said without hesitation. "I'd fix what's wrong, like Mama did." The girl's brow furrowed. "But I don't understand why they hate me here. I didn't do anything." Helene reached over, gently brushing a loose curl behind her ear. "You don't have to do anything to make people afraid. Sometimes just surviving is enough." That evening, Alaric entered the library and found Leora asleep with a book across her chest. He watched for a moment before gently lifting the book away and covering her with a shawl. Helene stood nearby. "She's beginning to hope," Helene said quietly. Alaric nodded. "And hope is dangerous." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the first bite of autumn. The trees in the courtyard had begun to turn, their leaves yellowing, shedding what no longer served them. And within the castle, the king knew there would come a time when protection would not be enough, not against politics, not against fear. But for now, he let her sleep. Helene's workshop nestled along the eastern corridor, a sunlit room filled with bolts of fabric, jars of pins, and thread of every color imaginable. The smell of lavender oil clung to the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of beeswax used to seal seams. Leora loved it here more than any other place in the castle. It reminded her of her mother's old cottage, cluttered but warm. Helene worked at the table, her needle darting through soft blue velvet, while Leora sat cross-legged on a low stool, clutching a bundle of fabric in her lap. "I pricked my finger again," Leora grumbled. "That's part of the trade," Helene said, smiling gently. "Every good stitch comes with a little blood." "I want to learn everything," Leora said. "Not just reading or sewing." "Everything." Helene set down her needle and turned toward her. "Why so eager, little lion?" "Because if they take it away, what the king gave me, I want to still have something. I want to be useful." Helene's smile faded. "You already are." Leora looked up. "You knew my mother, didn't you?" Helene froze. Then she stood and crossed to the window, folding her arms. "I did," she said. "A long time ago." Leora's eyes widened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because some memories are tender, like bruises. Press too hard, and they ache." "But you remember her?" Helene turned back. Her voice softened. "She was strong, fierce, too good for the world she lived in. We trained together, apprentices in midwifery. She was quicker than me, smarter too. I stayed at court." She left. Why? Because she couldn't stand the way things were done here, the way people in power treated the weak like stones in their boots. She wanted to help real people, so she went back to the marshlands. Leora swallowed. They called her cursed. They feared her. People fear what doesn't bow. Leora looked down at the folded cloth in her lap. Was she ever happy? Helene knelt beside her. When she held you. The door creaked open and Alaric entered. His expression softened at the sight of them. "How goes the training?" he asked. "She'll surpass me within a season," Helene said. "Stubborn, focused, and unafraid of blood." Leora beamed, but her smile faded quickly. "My mother knew how to birth children, heal wounds, mend cloth, mix herbs, and I can't even thread a needle right." "You will," Alaric said, "but you don't have to prove anything to anyone, least of all to ghosts." Leora tilted her head. "Do you believe in ghosts?" "I believe in memory," he replied, "and memory haunts better than any spirit." He turned to leave, but paused. "The court speaks of you more each day." "I know," she said. "They look at me like I've stolen something. They don't understand that you've lost more than they've ever had." Helene rose, smoothing her skirts. "You should let her speak to the people." Alaric raised an eyebrow. "She's not just a child anymore, she's a symbol. Let her be seen as she truly is, not whispered about in corridors." He considered it. Perhaps. Later that evening, Leora sat alone, practicing her stitching under candlelight. The room was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the fire. Her hands trembled less than before, each motion steadier. She looked up at the cloak hanging from the wall, her mother's. Worn, faded, but repaired carefully by Helene. She reached for it, ran her fingers over the stitching along the edge. Hidden in the lining, something crinkled. She opened the seam carefully and withdrew a small folded square of parchment. Her heart pounded. Inside, written in a careful hand, were words she didn't fully understand. She was not just a healer. She bore truth. "Guard it." Leora stared at the note, the handwriting unfamiliar but elegant. Something stirred in her chest, a feeling of warning and wonder. She folded the note again, placed it back in the seam, and whispered, "I'll guard it." Whatever it means. Outside, the wind picked up, and the castle's towers stood tall against the fading light, unaware that in a child's hands a secret had begun to pulse with quiet power. The first snow fell softly over the castle walls, blanketing the gardens where Merrin rested beneath the fountain's shadow. Leora watched from the window, chin resting on her arms, the cold fogging the glass. Winter had crept in without fanfare, quiet and ruthless. Down in the records chamber beneath the main keep, Alaric paced among shelves of parchment and wax seals. The royal archivist, a stooped man with wisps of white hair, held a brittle scroll with gloved hands. This was found in a box from the reign of King Wystan, the archivist said, buried beneath land grants. I would have missed it if not for her name. Alaric took the scroll. The seal had long since cracked. He read in silence, eyes narrowing. Meryn of House Elwyn, daughter of Lysara, once apprenticed under the Queen's physician, dismissed in secrecy under charges never formalized. She was here, Alaric said slowly, in these very halls. More than that, sire. She may have had royal blood through a lesser cousin line, minor, forgotten in the wars, but not irrelevant. Alaric's hand tightened on the scroll. If this is true, and the court finds out, it changes everything, the archivist finished. Later that morning, Duke Renwer requested private audience. He entered the king's study with the grace of someone used to getting his way. I hear, he began, there have been discoveries. Alaric said nothing. Renwer smiled. My informants are thorough. A blood connection, however faint, is still a claim, and a child with a claim, that invites trouble. She's a child, Alaric replied, not a pawn. She's more than that now, and you know it. Renwer leaned closer. Let me speak plain. If she is royal, even a thread's worth, the council must be informed, and if she is not, then the record should quietly vanish, for the good of the realm. Alaric's voice was ice. You'd have me erase the truth? I'd have you protect stability. Your kindness is admirable, but kindness topples kings when it becomes sentiment. The words stayed with Alaric long after Renwer left. He stood before the fire, scroll in hand, and stared into the flames. Meanwhile, in the corridor outside the great hall, Leora walked beside Hélène, clutching a cloth bundle filled with folded tunics. She kept her head down as nobles passed, their eyes cold, their whispers colder. Do they always look like that? She asked. Hélène nodded. They fear what they can't control. Good, Leora said. Let them fear. In the main hall, Queen Mother Ilyana sat with two noblewomen speaking softly. She was nothing a season ago, one said. Now she dines beside the king. The child has something in her eyes, said the other. Something that doesn't bow. Ilyana stirred her tea. And eyes like that often lose their heads if left unchecked. 2 days later, a summons was posted. The king called for a private hearing, closed to the public but attended by the council. Leora, Hélène, Sir Edryn, and the Queen Mother were among those gathered in the inner court. Alaric stood before them, scroll in hand. This document confirms Meryn of House Elwyn once served within these walls. Her removal was unceremonious and concealed. It also reveals a blood tie, however distant, to the royal lineage. A low murmur rippled through the room. Duke Renwer stepped forward. Then we must act. The girl must be formally tested. If she is royal, she must be declared so. If not, she is a ward of the crown, Alaric said firmly. That will not change. Forgive me, Majesty, Renwer replied, but this elevates her above every minor house. You are asking us to accept a peasant child as— I am not asking, Alaric said. I am commanding. Hélène placed a protective hand on Leora's shoulder. The girl stood silent, her back straight. Ilyana narrowed her eyes. And what if she begins to believe the blood in her makes her equal to kings? Alaric looked down at Leora. Then let her believe it. For perhaps in time she'll be the only one who remembers how to rule with both strength and mercy. And though the council said nothing more that day, the lines had been drawn, quietly, irrevocably. The wind howled through the stone corridors of Castle Valdenia, carrying with it the scent of frost and unrest. Snow had settled on the outer walls, turning the courtyards white and silent, like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the council chamber, heat from the braziers could not thaw the tension. Leora stood before the assembled court, flanked by Hélène and Sir Edryn. Her hands were clasped tightly at her front, knuckles pale, but her chin was raised. She wore a simple woolen gown and no jewelry, only a narrow braid tied back from her face like her mother had done. King Alaric entered last, his cloak billowing slightly with each step. He took his place at the head of the chamber, expression carved from stone. "This is not a trial," he began, "but a confirmation of record and witness. We do not judge the child. We acknowledge the truth." Duke Renwa stood as expected. "The truth may be clouded. What evidence do we have but the word of long-dead scribes?" Alaric gestured to the archivist, who stepped forward with the scroll, reading aloud the line that named Meryn of House Elwyn. The room fell silent as her name echoed. Renwa's eyes narrowed. "Even if we accept that she once served the court, there remains no proof of her bloodline." "There is her daughter," Helene said firmly. All eyes turned to her. Helene stepped forward. "I knew Meryn. We trained together." She spoke of her lineage, though quietly, afraid it would bring her danger. "She once carried a token of her family, a pendant with the Elwyn crest. She never wore it outside, but I saw it. I can draw it now if you demand proof." The Queen Mother leaned forward. "And why did she never declare it?" "Because she saw what ambition did to women here," Helene answered. "She wanted to heal, not be hunted." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Sir Edryn followed, and I too vouch for her skill, her poise, her dignity. "If blood alone made royalty, many here would be nothing but names in ledgers. Meryn lived as nobly as any queen." Leora's voice, quiet but clear, cut through the noise. "I don't care if I'm royal. I never asked for any of this. But my mother told me to walk with truth, and I will." A silence fell. It was not the quiet of dismissal, but of consideration. Alaric spoke. "I will not allow her to be punished for the secrets others kept. Whether noble or not, her conduct has been beyond reproach." Renwa's lips curled. "So she becomes a ward of the crown, and the rest of us simply accept it?" "You will," Alaric said, "or you will explain to the people why the king's word no longer matters." The Queen Mother's eyes locked on Leora's for a long moment. Whatever she saw there made her look away. After the hearing, as the nobles dispersed, many of them stiff with resentment, Leora remained in the chamber. She stood beside the tall windows, watching snowflakes melt on the leaded glass. Helene joined her. "You did well. I just told the truth." "That's harder than you know." Leora turned. "They hate me." "They fear you," Helene corrected. "And that's different." Alaric approached. "Come with me." He led them through the quiet halls to the northern tower, where the great tapestry of Valdenia's history hung, woven with lions, kings, and warriors. At the very end, space had been left for new events yet to be named. "This wall tells the story of our kingdom," Alaric said. "Someday your name may rest among them." Leora looked up at the tapestry, her eyes wide. "But only if you choose it. You're not bound to any legacy, not even mine." She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Can I still sew with Helene tomorrow?" He smiled. "You may do whatever you wish." And though snow still fell outside, within that chamber, something had shifted, a quiet thaw in the heart of a kingdom built on silence. Winter deepened its grip on Valdenia, cloaking the kingdom in frost. The castle walls wept cold and the hearths burned longer each night. Inside the king's study, logs crackled as Alaric sat alone, parchment scattered across the table. His fingers rested on a sealed letter he hadn't opened, not because he feared what was inside, but because he already knew. It was from the Queen Mother. "Remove the girl, or the court will do it for you." He closed his eyes. Footsteps approached, measured but light. Helene entered, hands dusted with chalk from the seamstress workshop. "You sent for me?" she asked. Alaric nodded, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Sit." She did, brushing her skirts as she settled. The fire cast warm light on her face, softening the wear of long days. "They're preparing to move against her," he said quietly. "Not with swords, but with silence, with doubt. With distance." Helene didn't flinch. "They've already begun. I can fight them, but she's a child. She's not alone." Alaric looked at her, and for the first time in years, let the silence be honest. "I failed once," he said. "When Eleanor died, I buried my heart with her. I thought distance would shield me from more loss, but this girl..." She opened something I sealed shut. Helene's voice was steady. Grief does that, it buries and unearths. She's like my daughter would have been, strong-willed, bold, hungry for answers. She reminds me of Merrin. He looked down. And you, remind me of who I used to be, before thrones and war and duty. You see people. I forgot how. Helene folded her hands. You haven't forgotten. You were just surviving. The words hit him harder than he expected. He leaned back, exhaling slowly. I envy your strength, he said. You carry sorrow, but you still reach for light. She met his gaze, unflinching. You fear being broken again. That's not weakness, that's love, refusing to die. For a moment they said nothing, then Alaric rose and crossed the room. He opened a small chest and withdrew a carved wooden box. Inside was a silver comb, delicate and worn. Elena gave me this for our daughter. She never lived to use it. He handed it to Helene. For Leora, if she wants it. Helene's fingers curled around it. She will treasure it. He moved closer, not out of impulse, but from something deeper, recognition, of years lost, of moments reclaimed. His hand hovered, then gently took hers. Thank you, for reminding me I am still a man, not just a crown. Helene's voice was a whisper. Then let yourself be both. He didn't kiss her, not yet. But in the quiet warmth of that fire-lit chamber, something shifted, not just between them, but within him. That evening, Leora joined the king at supper. The dining hall was mostly empty, as many nobles had found reasons to dine elsewhere. She noticed, she always did. Am I the reason they don't come? She asked. Yes, Alaric answered. But not the way you think. She tilted her head. Then how? They fear what you represent, change, and truth. But truth has a way of surviving where fear doesn't. She nodded slowly, then pulled something from her pocket, a ribbon embroidered with a lion. She'd made it that morning. For you, she said, to remind you what you protect. He accepted it, tying it around his wrist. You do realize you're becoming impossible to ignore, he said. She smiled. That's what Mama used to say about me. Later that night, Queen Mother Ilyana stood at her window, staring out into the snow. A letter from Duke Renwer lay open beside her. If he will not remove the girl, we must remove the woman beside her. Her fingers curled, knuckles pale. She rang the bell for her maid. Prepare a letter, she said coldly, to the seamstress. Her services are no longer required. In the shadows of rising affection, storm clouds gathered once more, silent, certain, and sharp. The morning air was crisp and sharp, the first frost coating the grass like a silver veil over the castle grounds. The hunt was to begin at dawn, a tradition that brought lords and ladies together under the guise of sport. Alaric had not participated in one for years, but this time he had a reason, to show strength. The court was whispering, and whispers grew louder when a king seemed to forget his own power. Leora stood by the stables, her hands tucked into the sleeves of a woolen cloak, watching the riders prepare. Her eyes followed the movements of the horses, their breath misting in the cold air. She had grown accustomed to the cold silence from the court, but today her presence felt different. Helene appeared beside her, her face shadowed by concern. You shouldn't be here alone. Leora looked up, a slight frown on her face. I'm not alone. The horses are here. Helene sighed but did not press. Instead, she glanced toward the riders assembling near the gates. It's dangerous even for the king. The Baron's men are rumored to be part of this hunt. It may not be sport to them. Leora stiffened at the mention of the Baron. Her mother's death still burned in her memory, raw and unhealed. I don't care about sport. I care about the truth. Before Helene could respond, Alaric appeared, dressed for the hunt, his dark cloak trailing behind him. His eyes found Leora, and for a moment he hesitated. She stood straighter as if in defiance of the lingering silence that often hung between them. You're to stay within the walls, he ordered gently. It's not safe for you to follow. Leora didn't flinch. I don't want to be protected. I want to be heard. His expression softened, but only slightly. I understand. But there is a time for voice and a time for action. This is neither. She nodded, the familiar sting of restraint pressing against her chest. But before she could speak again, a sharp cry split the air, and the riders were off, galloping through the castle gates toward the dense forest beyond. As the sun climbed higher, the hunt carried on through the wilderness. Alaric led the charge, his steed swift and sure. The cold wind whipped through the trees, and the sound of hooves mixed with the distant calls of prey. Despite the tension in the air, Alaric couldn't ignore the peace that came with the rhythm of the hunt, the familiar focus it demanded. But today something gnawed at him, a feeling of being watched, of being set up. He turned to Sir Edrin, who rode at his side, face grim. "Keep your eyes open, I don't trust this." Sir Edrin nodded, his gaze scanning the forest. "I've heard rumors. There are men in the woods, Baron's men. They've been tracking your movements." Alaric frowned. "And why haven't you warned me sooner?" "They've been subtle. If you hadn't ordered the hunt, we might not have known." But now, Edrin's voice trailed off as a shadow moved quickly between the trees. It happened in an instant. An arrow flew through the air, aimed directly at Alaric. It missed by inches, but the message was clear. Someone was targeting him. The men around him drew their swords, the sound of steel ringing out. "Form a perimeter," Alaric barked. "Move!" But it was too late. Another shot rang out, this time striking a rider at the rear of the group. The man fell from his horse with a cry. "Ambush!" Edrin shouted. "Stay close!" The forest erupted into chaos. Arrows rained down, and men scattered. Alaric's heart pounded in his chest. He fought to maintain control, to rally his riders, but the attackers were too many, too well hidden among the trees. Suddenly, from the edge of the forest, a group of horsemen emerged, blocking their retreat. It was a group of men Alaric recognized, Baron Esten's soldiers, their faces cold and empty of remorse. "Your Majesty," one of the men called, his voice mocking. "It seems the king is not so invincible after all." Alaric's eyes narrowed. "You've made a grave mistake." The Baron's men laughed, circling him like wolves. Alaric's sword was drawn in an instant, but Sir Edrin stepped in front of him, raising his shield. "We'll fight for the king," Sir Edrin shouted, rallying the men who still stood. The battle was short, brutal. Steel clashed against steel, the screams of men echoing through the trees. Alaric fought with precision, but the chaos made it hard to keep his bearings. In the distance he saw a flash of movement, a rider charging toward the edge of the clearing. He recognized the figure instantly, Leora, riding without fear, her face set in determination. She was charging into the heart of the conflict, a knife strapped to her side. "No!" Alaric shouted, his voice desperate. "Get back to the castle!" But Leora did not listen. She rode through the chaos, her eyes fixed on the Baron's men, her small frame becoming a symbol of defiance. And then, as the battle reached its peak, betrayal struck. One of the riders closest to Alaric, the very one who had sworn loyalty, turned his sword on him, aiming for his heart. The betrayal was swift. But the moment it happened, everything went silent. Time seemed to stretch, and Alaric's thoughts became a blur. And in that instant, Leora's shout cut through the chaos. "No one hurts him!" She threw herself at the betrayer, knocking him off balance. Her blade flashed in the dim light as she struck, her hands guided by more than just anger, but by a purpose that had been born out of everything she had lost. The betrayal had been thwarted. For now. But as Alaric regained his footing, his gaze locked on Leora, his heart pounding not from the fight but from the knowledge that she had just saved him. The winds of betrayal still whispered through the trees as the castle slowly returned to a grim silence. The hunt, once a celebration of strength and power, had turned into a bloodied struggle for survival. Alaric, though still shaking from the close call, stood firm. His riders, too, were bruised but determined. They returned to the castle at a hard pace, the horizon dimming with the last of the light. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension, a quiet dread that hung like the storm clouds on the horizon. As Alaric dismounted, he was met with an unsettling sight. Queen Mother Ileana, her expression colder than the winter air waiting in the courtyard. Her eyes flickered over him, not with the usual disdain, but with something darker, something close to calculation. "You're wounded," she said. her voice betraying nothing but icy concern. "And yet you still persist with this foolishness." Alaric straightened, his grip tight on the reins. "This foolishness has kept you safe, Mother. It's kept the kingdom intact. And this child," she continued, "has brought nothing but chaos. You know this." He took a step closer, his voice dropping low. "Do not make this about her. This is about power, and you fear it slipping through your fingers." Her gaze sharpened, but she remained silent for a moment. The wind stirred the edges of her gown, but her posture remained rigid, unyielding. "The court is already in turmoil," she finally spoke, her tone clipped. "There are whispers everywhere, and those whispers, they turn into knives. If you insist on this, on her, I will no longer support you." Alaric's eyes narrowed. "You threaten your own blood." "No," she replied coldly. "I'm offering a solution, one that protects what is left of this kingdom. Your throne is being eroded by sentiment and uncertainty. The court wants stability. They want what they've always had, what you promised them. And what do you want, Mother?" Alaric's voice was now harder, quieter. She stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "I want the same thing I've always wanted, control. The peace that comes with knowing the right people are in their proper place. And you think Leora is not?" Ilyana paused, the sharpness in her expression softening just enough to reveal a flicker of something more vulnerable beneath. "You've made her a symbol of your weakness. A symbol of what you refuse to see, that there is no place for her in a world where power is everything." Alaric stared at her, his chest tightening. "You would see her discarded, after everything she's endured, after everything I've given up to keep her safe. I have given you everything to keep this kingdom intact. And you would destroy it for a child? You've made her your pawn, Mother," Alaric snapped, "and I will not allow it." Ilyana's eyes flared with fury. "Then it seems we've reached the end of our conversation." For a moment, neither spoke. The wind seemed to still, holding its breath along with the castle itself. "You will remove her from your court," Ilyana said, her words measured and final. "Or I will." A long silence hung in the air. Alaric's gaze hardened, his hand clenching around the reins. "You've never understood," he said, his voice quiet but fierce. "The people don't need control, they need protection." Ilyana's lips curled in a faint smile, her eyes dark with quiet satisfaction. "And that's where you're wrong. You are the king." "But a king who loses his grip is no king at all." Alaric turned away, his steps heavy as he strode toward the castle doors. Behind him, he heard the faint rustle of her gown as she walked away, her voice drifting through the air like a warning. "You will regret this, my son," she called, but he didn't turn. Inside the castle, Alaric moved through the halls in a blur. His mind raced, but there was no clear path to follow. The pieces of his kingdom were shifting too quickly, and he was losing his grip. In the distance, he heard the sound of footsteps, Leora, emerging from the shadows of the hallway. Her face was solemn, but determined. "I heard," she said, her voice steady. "She's given you an ultimatum." Alaric stopped, his heart tightening at the sight of her. "I won't let her destroy what's left of you," Leora continued, stepping closer. "And I won't let her make me into a weapon. I'm not her pawn. I'm not anyone's pawn." For a long moment, they stood in silence. The castle felt colder now, as if the very walls themselves were bracing for the inevitable conflict. Alaric finally spoke, his voice strained with the weight of everything that had come before. "I never wanted this for you, for either of us." "I know," Leora replied quietly, "but now we don't have a choice, and I'll stand with you. I'll fight for you." He looked down at her, the smallest flicker of something like hope igniting in his chest. The world was shifting. The court, his mother, even the kingdom itself, they all waited for him to make a choice. But one thing was certain now, he would not bow to threats. Not anymore. And neither would she. The cold morning light filtered weakly through the castle windows, casting long shadows across the stone floors. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that came before a storm, when everything held its breath. Alaric stood before the mirror in his chamber, his fingers brushing over the fabric of his royal cloak. The weight of it was no longer a symbol of authority. It felt like a shackle, binding him to decisions made long before his time. The sound of footsteps behind him drew his attention, and he turned to see Leora entering, her presence quiet but undeniable. She wore a simple gown, yet it was a gown that spoke of strength. Her shoulders squared, her chin held high. In her hands, she carried the silver comb he had given to Helene the night before. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her words. Alaric's heart clenched, the familiar ache settling deep within him. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice tight with the emotion he had kept hidden for so long. "You can still walk away. You don't owe any of them anything." Leora shook her head, her eyes steady though there was a flicker of uncertainty. "I owe it to myself, to the truth, to the people who've already decided what I am." "I won't hide from that." Alaric moved toward her, kneeling down slightly so that their eyes met. "You are not a pawn to be moved, Leora. You are the future of this kingdom, whether they like it or not." She nodded, though her lips pressed into a thin line, a mixture of determination and fear. "And I'll fight for that future." The door opened, and Sir Edryn stepped inside, bowing his head. "Sire, the council is awaiting your presence. It's time." Alaric exhaled, standing tall again, the weight of his crown now feeling heavier than ever. "Lead the way." The corridors were silent as they made their way to the great hall. The castle felt still, almost as if it too awaited the judgment of the day. When they reached the hall, the large wooden doors were pushed open, and the whispers of the court grew louder. Nobles gathered, eyes fixed on the king and the girl at his side. At the front of the room, Queen Mother Ileana sat regally, her expression a mix of concern and contempt, a careful mask of politeness. Her gaze flickered over Leora for just a moment before returning to the king. She made no move to stand. Alaric walked to the throne, his steps measured. Leora stayed by his side, her presence steady, unwavering. When they reached the dais, he turned to face the court, his voice rising in command. "Today marks a new chapter for Valdenia," he began, his tone firm. "Not one of bloodlines or titles, but of truth and loyalty. Leora, daughter of Meryn, is no longer a shadow to be feared. She is the future of this kingdom." A murmur spread across the room, some faces uncertain, others filled with disdain. The nobles exchanged glances, but none dared to speak, their silence pressing against Alaric's words like a weight. Leora stepped forward, her eyes sweeping over the court. She didn't flinch, didn't shy away from the weight of their gaze. She stood tall, a silent promise to herself and to everyone watching. "I do not seek your approval," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I seek the truth and the right to stand alongside those who fight for what is just." Queen Mother Ileana's lips curled, though the gesture was barely perceptible. "And what makes you think the kingdom will accept this?" Leora turned her gaze toward Ileana, her eyes sharp, unwavering. "Because the people will no longer be silenced by fear. They will see me for what I am, not what others want me to be." Alaric's hand found her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. "She will not be cast aside, no matter the politics of this court. This kingdom will be governed by justice, not by the whims of those who cling to power through deceit." Ileana stood, her posture regal yet sharp as a blade. "This is madness, Alaric. You risk everything for a child you barely know. And yet, I have more faith in her than I ever had in the nobility that surrounds us," Alaric replied, his voice unwavering. The tension in the hall thickened, every noble holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Ileana's eyes narrowed, but she made no further comment. Her silence was a weight, one that threatened to collapse under the sheer force of the moment. The king's words rang out again, steady and strong. "This court will recognize Leora as a ward of the crown and as my chosen successor in matters of the kingdom." A gasp rippled through the court. Leora stepped forward again, her eyes now meeting those of the courtiers who had watched her so closely, their judgment hanging heavy over her. "I stand not as a rival to any of you, but as someone who will see this kingdom rise on the strength of truth, honor, and mercy." Alaric's gaze met hers, pride and worry warring within him. He had made a choice that would alter the course of Valdenia forever, and in this moment he understood that it wasn't just his kingdom at stake, it was his heart. The Queen Mother turned, her expression unreadable. "We shall see, Alaric," she said softly. "We shall see." And as the court stood still, the first chapter of their new rule began, not with a crown, but with the promise of truth and the unspoken vow that they would stand together no matter the cost. The night air was heavy with tension as Alaric and Helene walked side by side through the moonlit corridors of the castle. The echoes of their footsteps seemed too loud for the silence around them, and the weight of the night pressed in like a storm. They had both just left the council chamber, and the room's cold air still clung to their skin. The court was still in uproar, torn between allegiance to the king and fear of the unknown. The nobles whispered in their chambers, no doubt questioning the choice he had made. But Alaric could not afford to let fear dictate his actions any longer. The castle had quieted by now, its halls deserted except for the flickering light of candles in every other room. The heavy scent of wood smoke filled the air, mixing with the faint smell of earth from the garden. For a brief moment, he could almost hear the sounds of his wife's laughter from long ago, before the burdens of the throne had dulled his heart. Helene stopped near one of the large windows, her silhouette framed by the pale light of the moon. She glanced out into the darkness, her expression unreadable. Alaric paused beside her, his hands clasped behind his back. "You've been so strong through all of this," Alaric said softly, his voice low. "I never expected this weight to fall on you too." She turned her head toward him, her eyes meeting his. "I never expected it either. But here we are. I don't know what I would have done without you," he admitted, his words hesitant as though testing the air between them. "The court is too much for me to carry alone. I need someone beside me who sees things for what they are, not for what they wish them to be." Helene looked down, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her dress. "And I've always been that person." "Haven't I?" Alaric's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "You have. More than you know." The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. The crackle of the hearth in a nearby chamber was the only sound, the flames licking against the stone. Alaric reached out, his fingers brushing against her hand, a tentative touch. "Helene, there is something I must ask of you, something I should have asked long ago." Helene's breath caught in her throat, her pulse quickening. She turned to face him fully, meeting his gaze with a quiet intensity. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alaric swallowed, the weight of his next words pressing down on him like the air before a storm. "I've made mistakes. I've allowed the past to dictate too much. I've hidden behind my crown, behind my duty, and in doing so I've lost what truly matters." Helene stepped back slightly, her eyes searching his face for understanding, for any hint of what he was about to say. The tension between them was palpable, charged with something unspoken, something they had both been avoiding for so long. "I've been a king. But I've forgotten how to be a man," Alaric continued. "A man who deserves more than just duty, more than just a crown." Helene took another step back, her heart racing. "Alaric, what are you saying?" He took a deep breath, his voice shaking as he spoke. "I am asking you to be by my side, not just as my confidant, but as my partner. As someone who will stand with me, not because of my title, but because of what we could build together. Will you be my queen, Helene?" Her breath hitched, the words hanging between them like an impossible dream. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Helene's hands trembled, but she didn't pull away. She looked at him, her gaze filled with something that had been buried for years. Hope. "I want me to stand beside you after everything." Her voice was thick with emotion. Alaric nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Yes, I want you to stand beside me, not just because of what's expected, but because of what we could have. What we could do for this kingdom, for the people who need us." Helene's mind raced, the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest. She had never imagined this moment would come. Not like this, not after all the years spent watching him from the shadows. The thought of standing by his side, not as a servant, not as a tool for his power, but as an equal, was a dream she hadn't dared to dream. But the reality of it now, the gravity of the choice before her, was overwhelming. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of her uncertainty. "I've always been a healer, a protector, but not a queen." "You've been more of a queen than anyone else in this castle," Alaric said, his voice soft but firm. "You see the truth. You see what others are too blinded by pride to see." Helene looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of insincerity, but there was none. There was only honesty, only the raw vulnerability of a man who had once thought himself invincible, but now stood before her, asking for something more than a crown. She exhaled slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. "And what if the court rejects us? What if they refuse to accept me?" Alaric reached out, gently taking her hands in his. "Then we will make them see. We will show them what true leadership looks like." Helene closed her eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but also the warmth of something she had longed for, a partnership, a future. And finally, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stand with you." Alaric's eyes softened, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel something beyond duty. Hope. Perhaps at last it was hope that would carry them forward. The castle grounds had quieted in the wake of the tense days leading up to Alaric's decision. The banners still fluttered in the wind, but the storm had passed. The court, though reluctant, had accepted the king's choice. The nobles whispered less now, their voices silenced by the weight of his authority, though the shadows of their doubt would never fully disappear. But Alaric knew that for once, it was not just fear that ruled the court. It was respect. Now the kingdom was at a crossroads, not just politically, but within the hearts of the people. And to Alaric, nothing was more important than proving the truth of his decisions. Leora stood at the gates, gazing out into the horizon, where the distant hills of Black Hollow rose in the background. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the silver comb tucked securely in her pocket. Her mother's legacy, her new inheritance. It had become a symbol, not just of her past, but of the future she was about to claim for herself. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to find Alaric, dressed in a traveling cloak, standing beside her. His face, usually so guarded, was soft with something akin to pride, though there was an undercurrent of something else in his eyes, something heavier. "I think it's time," he said, his voice steady but laced with unspoken emotion. Leora looked up at him. "Time for what?" "To return to Black Hollow," he replied simply. "To remember where we came from, and to make sure the people know that they are not forgotten." She nodded, her expression firm. "They will remember. And I will make sure they know they have a place in this kingdom." He smiled, but there was a trace of sorrow in it. "I never imagined I would return there. I thought I had buried that place, buried the memories of what was lost." "I know," Leora said quietly, "but we carry our pasts with us, don't we? Even when we try to leave them behind." Alaric's eyes met hers, and for a long moment they shared an understanding deeper than words could express. He turned toward the waiting horses, signaling for the attendants to prepare them. The journey to Black Hollow was long, winding through thick forests and rolling hills. The roads were muddy from the late autumn rains, and the landscape seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The castle had been left behind, its looming towers fading into the distance, but the weight of it still hung on Alaric's shoulders. His decisions were no longer confined to walls of stone. They now had to live within the land, within the people. When they finally arrived, the village was just as Leora remembered, small, humble, and haunted by years of neglect. The homes were simple, their thatched roofs low and crooked. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. But there was something else now, something that had not existed before. Hope. The villagers had gathered near the center of town, their eyes wary at first, but softening as they recognized the figures that had come to them. Leora dismounted from her horse, Alaric following close behind. The quiet murmur of the crowd fell to silence as Leora stepped forward. She stood tall, her hands at her sides, her heart beating loudly in her chest. She knew the weight of their gazes, the judgment, the curiosity, the hope. "I am Leora," she began, her voice clear and steady, "daughter of Merin, who walked this land as a healer. I am not here to claim what is not mine. I am here to remind you that this kingdom does not forget. We are not just subjects to be ruled from a distance. We are people, with hearts that deserve to be heard." Alaric stood just behind her, his presence a silent affirmation of her words. "There has been much loss," he spoke, his voice strong, carrying across the crowd. "But there is also strength in the rebuilding. I have chosen to stand beside Leora, not just because of her blood, but because of the fire in her spirit, the same fire that lives in every one of you." The village remained quiet, but the air had shifted. A weight had lifted, and in its place, something else was taking root. A sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. Leora's voice broke the silence again. "Together, we will rebuild. We will make sure that the kingdom knows that it is not just for the nobles or the lords, but for every one of us who has fought to survive." There was a ripple through the crowd, a collective exhale as the people realized the truth of what was being said. A few voices rose in quiet agreement, and then more until the sound of their words filled the air, echoing through the village. As the evening drew to a close, the villagers gathered around a bonfire, the flames dancing in the crisp night air. Leora sat beside Alaric, her heart swelling with something new, something she had never known before, a sense of belonging. She was no longer just a girl from Black Hollow. She was a leader, a beacon for those who had been forgotten. And for the first time in a long while, Alaric allowed himself to relax, to see the possibility of a future built not on power, but on unity. The night was cold, but the warmth of the fire, the voices of the people, and the presence of those who had fought for their place in the world made it feel like home.